The Interstellar Combat Academy had been operating for approximately 6,000 standard cycles, which was quite impressive considering the bureaucratic nightmare involved in getting 47 different species to agree on literally anything. The institution floated in a stable orbit around a thoroughly unremarkable yellow dwarf star, its gleaming corridors a testament to what could be achieved when sufficient funding met adequate health and safety regulations. And by adequate, the Academy Board meant excessive. By excessive, they meant enough to make an insurance adjuster weep with joy. The training protocols had been refined over millennia, carefully calibrated to challenge cadets from every member species of the Galactic Collective, without actually causing permanent damage. This was harder than it sounded. The Vrexel, for instance, could survive in hard vacuum for up to 3 minutes, while the Pellucid required atmospheric pressure, so specific that a deviation of 0.03% would cause their cellular structure to destabilize in a manner that was both fatal and remarkably difficult to clean up. The Academy had developed quite the reputation for producing the finest military officers in known space, largely because they hadn't killed a student in over 2 centuries. Then humans had applied for membership. The admissions committee had debated for 6 months. Humans came from a planet that the initial survey team had classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, which was academic speak for how is anything still alive down there. The gravity was punishing. The atmospheric oxygen concentration could charitably be described as aggressive. The planet rotated around its star at a distance that exposed it to enough radiation to sterilize most civilized worlds. It had weather systems that could flatten cities, tectonic activity that reshaped continents, and approximately 8 million species, most of which had evolved the ability to kill and eat each other with remarkable efficiency. The humans themselves were biological paradoxes. They were simultaneously fragile and absurdly durable. Their skin could be punctured by their own planet's plant life, yet they could survive internal injuries that would liquefy a Korathi. They needed to consume nutrition every few hours, or they became irritable, but could apparently survive for weeks without it if motivated by spite. Their healing factor was something the Galactic Medical Consortium was still trying to understand, largely because it seemed to operate on principles that violated several established laws of cellular biology. After considerable debate, and a presentation where the human ambassador had cheerfully described something called Australian fauna, which had caused 3 committee members to require sedation, the Academy had accepted a trial cohort of 5 human cadets. Cadet Marcus Chen was number 3 of that cohort. He was 22 standard years old, which was young for most species, but apparently peak physical condition for humans. He stood at approximately 1.8 meters, possessed the dark hair and angular features common to East Asian genetic lineages, and had the peculiar habit of smiling at things that should have terrified him. His psychological evaluations were concerning to the Threxian counselors, who kept noting his inappropriate threat response calibration. The humans had responded that this was normal and to stop worrying about it. The incident occurred during a standard combat exercise in Training Hall 7, which was equipped with the latest generation of kinetic dampening fields and enough medical sensors to detect a bruise forming in real time. The exercise was simple. Paired cadets would engage in controlled martial combat, with the dampening fields preventing any strike from delivering more than 30% of its actual force. This had been carefully calculated as sufficient to provide realistic training feedback while preventing any injury more serious than mild bruising. It was, the safety engineers had assured everyone, absolutely foolproof. Cadet Marcus Chen was paired against Cadet Vrixnal, a Korathi whose species had evolved in a gas giant's upper atmosphere, where the gravity was roughly 1/3 that of Earth. The Korathi were elegant beings, their bodies primarily composed of a silicon-based cartilage that made them remarkably flexible, but also remarkably delicate by human standards. Vrixnal was a capable fighter, his 4 limbs moving with the fluid grace characteristic of his species. The match proceeded normally for the first 2 minutes. Marcus moved with the heavy, deliberate momentum of a high-gravity worlder. Vrixnal flowed around his strikes like water, landing precise counterhits that the dampening field reduced to gentle taps. The observing instructors, A mixed species group watching from the elevated platform were nodding approvingly. Proper form. Excellent technique. Nobody was leaking any fluids. A textbook exercise. Then the dampening field hiccuped. Later analysis would reveal that a power coupling 3 decks below had developed a microscopic stress fracture, causing a cascade failure that lasted exactly 0.73 seconds. In that brief window, the field strength dropped from 70% dampening to approximately 12%. Vrixnal, mid-strike, delivered what should have been a gentle tap to Marcus's face. Without the field's protection, it was a full-force Korathi combat strike, enhanced by all 4 limbs working in coordinated succession. The sound was distinctive, a meaty crack that echoed through the training hall with a sort of finality that made every species present wince in sympathetic pain. Marcus's head snapped backward. He staggered, performed an oddly graceful half-spin, and hit the mat face first. For a moment, there was perfect silence in Training Hall 7. The kind of silence that occurs when everyone present is simultaneously trying to process what they just witnessed and calculate their liability. Then someone screamed. It was Vrixnal, actually, his vocalization processor making a sound like a distressed kettle. His 4 arms were raised in horror, trembling as he stared at his own limbs as if they had betrayed him. The other cadets were backing away, several species making gestures of warding that ranged from religious to superstitious to just generally panicked. Instructor Kelmath, a pellucid whose translucent body was currently flashing colors that indicated severe distress, was already triggering every emergency protocol simultaneously. Medical alerts screamed through the Academy's network. Automated systems began sealing the training hall. Somewhere in the administrative wing, insurance adjusters were probably having heart attacks, or the species-appropriate equivalent thereof. Marcus pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. His face was a mess. There was blood, which humans possessed in alarming quantities and seemed entirely too willing to share with their environment. His nose was clearly broken, bent at an angle that made several observers feel queasy. The entire left side of his face was already swelling, the skin darkening in a way that indicated substantial subcutaneous damage. His left eye was swelling shut. He touched his face gingerly, pulled his hand away to look at the blood, and made a sound that several species would later struggle to describe in their incident reports. He laughed, not a bitter laugh, or a shocked laugh, or the hysterical laugh of someone in psychological shock. A genuine, slightly annoyed laugh, like he had just remembered he'd forgotten to do his laundry. "Oh man," he said, his words slurred by his rapidly swelling face. "That's gonna look terrible in tomorrow's sparring photos." 3 more species began screaming. The medical team arrived in under 90 seconds, which was actually slower than protocol demanded, but considering they were dealing with the Academy's first major training injury in 217 years, fairly impressive. The team was headed by Dr. Thexali, a Vrexel whose species had pioneered modern surgical techniques back when humans were still figuring out fire. She had 16 years of experience, 3 advanced degrees, and had personally performed over 4,000 successful surgeries. She took one look at Marcus's face, and her primary respiratory spiracles flared in distress. "Get him to surgical bay 3 immediately," she commanded, her voice carrying the sort of calm authority that came from years of emergency medicine. "Full trauma team, maxillofacial specialist, and someone contact the human medical liaison. We're going to need their physiological database." Marcus tried to wave them off. "It's really not that bad. I just need some ice and maybe, Cadet Chen, you are bleeding from 6 different locations on your face, Doctor." Thexali interrupted. "Your nose is deviated at a 40-degree angle. I can see bone fragments. You will not just need some ice. I mean, I've had worse," Marcus offered, which did not have the reassuring effect he seemed to think it would. The medical transport gurney arrived, hovering on anti-grav repulsors. Marcus climbed onto it himself, waving away the attendants who tried to help. This apparently violated several protocols, because alarms started going off. He lay back, still dripping blood onto the pristine white surface, and gave Vrixnal a thumbs-up gesture that the Korathi did not understand but found oddly comforting anyway. The journey to Surgical Bay 3 took 4 minutes and involved enough medical scanning equipment pointed at Marcus to map his cellular structure down to the molecular level. The data was streaming in real time to Dr. Thexali's visual interface, and what she saw was not improving her mood. Human facial structure was ridiculously complex. 14 different bones, all precisely arranged to protect the sensory organs and brain, while somehow also being involved in respiration, nutrition intake, and vocal communication. The bones themselves were calcium-based and surprisingly dense for an organic species, but also surprisingly brittle compared to what she was used to working with. The soft tissue was even worse, a complicated mess of muscles, nerves, blood vessels, and fat deposits all layered together in what seemed like deliberate chaos. Marcus's injury involved at least 3 fractured bones, a completely displaced nasal structure, massive soft tissue damage, and what appeared to be a developing hematoma that would probably cover half his face by morning. His left orbital bone was cracked. Several blood vessels were ruptured, and he was still conscious and talking, which seemed medically improbable. Surgical Bay 3 was the Academy's premier operating theater, equipped with medical technology that could reattach severed limbs, regrow organs, and perform neural surgery with atomic precision. The surgical team was already assembling when they arrived. Dr. Thexali as lead surgeon, Dr. Korth as anesthesiologist, Dr. Minnie as the maxillofacial specialist, and 3 surgical assistants whose species were all better at fine motor control than anyone else in the Academy. They transferred Marcus to the surgical platform, which adjusted its configuration to accommodate human physiology based on the streaming medical data. The bay's holographic displays flickered to life, showing 3-dimensional models of his skull, highlighted areas of damage glowing an ominous red. "All right, Cadet Chen," Dr. Korth said, his voice synthesizer giving his words a soothing melodic quality. "We're going to administer anesthesia now. You'll feel a slight. Will I be able to play the violin after this?" Marcus interrupted. Dr. Korth paused. "I wasn't aware your injury affected your hands. I can't play the violin now either. I just wondered if this would magically give me that ability." There was a long silence in Surgical Bay 3. "Human humor is going to take some getting used to," Dr. Minnie observed quietly. The anesthesia took effect quickly, though they had to use nearly twice the calculated dose because human metabolism apparently processed pharmaceutical compounds with the efficiency of a chemical factory. Marcus's eyes finally closed, his breathing regulated by the medical monitors as his body relaxed into unconsciousness. Dr. Thexali examined the holographic display, manipulating it with her manipulation fields to view the injury from every angle. "This is going to be complex. The nasal structure needs complete reconstruction. We'll need to reduce these fractures, realign the septum, and repair the soft tissue damage while ensuring we don't compromise his respiratory function." "The bone density is remarkable," Dr. Minnie said, zooming in on a cross-section. "I've never worked with calcium phosphate composite this dense. It's going to make fragment removal interesting." "What's the healing projection?" one of the assistants asked. Dr. Thexali pulled up the human medical database, scrolling through the information provided by Earth's medical authorities. Her respiratory spiracles flared again. According to this, facial fractures in humans typically heal in 6 to 8 weeks. Full recovery in 12 weeks. Soft tissue repairs faster, 3 to 4 weeks for the majority of visible healing. "That's remarkably fast," Dr. Korth observed. "Most species take twice that long. Humans have an aggressive healing factor," Dr. Thexali confirmed. "Their bodies apparently treat any injury as a potentially fatal threat and respond accordingly. It's medically excessive but evolutionarily logical for a species from a death world." "Let's begin," she announced, her manipulation fields activating the surgical instruments. The operation was a masterpiece of modern medicine applied to deliberately archaic biology. The surgical instruments, designed to work at the cellular level, found themselves dealing with tissues that were surprisingly resistant to manipulation. Human skin was tougher than it looked, layered with enough structural protein to provide genuine armor against minor damage. The blood vessels, when sealed, tried to heal themselves mid-operation, forcing the team to work faster than they'd anticipated. Dr. Minnie worked on reconstructing the nasal structure, using micromanipulation fields to carefully position bone fragments back into their correct alignment. The human septum was cartilage rather than bone, which was apparently a design feature rather than a flaw, though it seemed unnecessarily vulnerable. She applied surgical adhesive that would hold the structure in place while the bone regenerated, a process that would apparently begin within hours rather than days. Dr. Thexali focused on the soft tissue damage, repairing torn muscles and severed blood vessels with practiced precision. The sheer amount of blood flow to the human face was alarming. The vascular network was dense enough to supply massive amounts of oxygen and nutrients, which explained the healing speed, but also explained why facial injuries in humans bled so dramatically. The orbital fracture required the most delicate work. The bone was thin here, designed to protect the eye while remaining light enough not to interfere with the elaborate muscle structures that controlled ocular movement. Dr. Minnie placed a temporary support structure that would stabilize the area while the bone healed, using a biocompatible polymer that the body would gradually absorb as the natural bone regenerated. 3 hours into the surgery, Dr. Korth noticed something odd on the monitors. His metabolism is increasing. Dr. Thexali glanced at the readings. Heart rate was up slightly. Core temperature had increased by 0.3 degrees. Cellular activity in the damaged areas was elevated. The healing process is already beginning. His body is mobilizing resources to the injury site. We're still operating, Dr. Minnie said, somewhat incredulously. Human biology doesn't seem to wait for permission, Dr. Thexali replied. Continue. We need to finish before his immune system decides we're a threat. The surgical team worked faster, racing against a patient who was apparently trying to heal himself while they were still repairing him. It was unprecedented and slightly annoying. 4 hours after they'd begun, Dr. Thexali sealed the final incision, applied the dermal regenerator to minimize scarring, and stepped back to examine their work. The holographic display showed green across all major indicators. Bone alignment was perfect. Soft tissue repairs were holding. Blood flow was normal. Respiratory function was uncompromised. Marcus's face, while still swollen and discolored, was structurally sound. The monitoring systems predicted full structural recovery in 6 weeks, full aesthetic recovery in 12 weeks, though they added multiple disclaimers about human healing being somewhat unpredictable. Excellent work, everyone, Dr. Thexali said, feeling the tension drain from her body. Let's move him to recovery. The recovery ward at the Interstellar Combat Academy was designed for comfort and rapid healing, with adjustable atmospheric conditions, neural damping fields to reduce pain, and enough monitoring equipment to detect a problem before it became critical. They placed Marcus in a private recovery pod, mainly because they weren't sure how other species would react to sharing space with an injured human. Dr. Thexali was reviewing the surgical notes when Marcus woke up 6 hours later. Most species required at least 12 hours to recover from anesthesia. Humans, apparently, metabolized it faster than expected. Again. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on the ceiling of the recovery pod. He reached up carefully to touch his face and encountered the protective medical field they'd placed over the surgical site. Cadet Chen, Dr. Thexali said, appearing at his bedside. How do you feel? Marcus considered this question with the careful deliberation of someone whose face had recently been reconstructed at the molecular level. Like I got hit by a transport shuttle, he said finally. His voice was slightly nasal due to the internal splinting, but clearer than she'd expected. But I've felt worse. You keep saying that, Doctor. Thexali observed. I'm beginning to find it concerning. I broke my arm in 3 places when I was 12. Marcus offered conversationally. Fell out of a tree. And I had a concussion playing football when I was 16. Oh, and there was this time rock climbing, where I dislocated my shoulder. So, comparatively, this isn't that bad. Dr. Thexali's respiratory spiracles flared in distress. You engage in recreational activities that cause these injuries. Well, I mean, that's kind of the fun of it? Ha ha ha. This conversation was not improving Dr. Thexali's understanding of human psychology. She decided to change topics. Your surgery was successful. We've reconstructed your nasal structure, repaired the orbital fracture, and addressed all soft tissue damage. You'll need to remain in recovery for at least 3 days while we monitor your healing progress. 3 days? Marcus tried to sit up, which triggered multiple alarms. I have combat drills on Tuesday. You absolutely do not have combat drills on Tuesday, Doctor. Thexali said firmly. You have medical observation and restricted activity. Your face experienced significant trauma. You need time to heal. But I feel fine, Marcus protested, which was demonstrably false given that he was covered in monitoring equipment that disagreed with this assessment. Over the next 72 hours, Marcus proved to be both an ideal patient and an absolutely terrible patient. He followed medical instructions precisely, remained in the recovery pod when instructed, and didn't complain about the dietary restrictions. However, he also appeared to be healing at a rate that made the medical staff recalibrate their equipment 3 times to ensure it wasn't malfunctioning. The swelling decreased rapidly. The discoloration, which should have lasted weeks, faded to yellow-green by the 2nd day. The bone scans showed calcification that should have taken at least a week appearing after 72 hours. His pain levels, according to the neural monitors, should have had him requesting sedation. Instead, he asked for his datapad so he could keep up with his coursework. Dr. Thexali brought in Dr. Yimri, a human medical specialist who served as a liaison between Earth medical authorities and the galactic medical community. Dr. Yimri was a cheerful woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of comfortable competence that came from decades of practice. She examined Marcus's recovery data and nodded approvingly. This is actually pretty normal for a healthy young human. The healing factor kicks into overdrive for facial injuries because the brain prioritizes protecting sensory organs. This is normal, Doctor, Thexali repeated, somewhat faintly. Oh sure. He'll probably be back to full function in a month, maybe 6 weeks. The scarring will be minimal. Might even be completely gone in a year. Human skin is pretty good at regeneration. Most species take 3 times as long to recover from injuries half this severe, Dr. Thexali said. Dr. Yimri shrugged. Evolutionary advantage of being from a death world. You either heal fast or you die. Humans got pretty good at healing. The news of the accident had spread through the academy with the speed of light through fiber optic cable, which was to say instantly and with minimal degradation. By the time Marcus was moved from the recovery pod to a standard medical room, he had received 14 formal apologies from Academy administration, 37 messages from fellow cadets, and 6 care packages from Earth containing items that the medical staff had to carefully inspect. Vrixnall visited on the 3rd day, accompanied by 2 of his clutchmates for moral support. The Korathi looked absolutely miserable, his normally luminescent skin patches dim with distress. Cadet Chen, he began, his voice synthesizer wavering. I am so profoundly sorry. I have brought dishonor to my family, my species, and the academy. If there is any way I can make amends, dude, it wasn't your fault, Marcus interrupted, waving away the apology. The dampening field failed. That's a technical malfunction, not your screw-up. But I struck you. I caused terrible injury. You landed a solid hit during a combat exercise. That's literally what we're training for. Yeah, the circumstances sucked, but that's not on you. Marcus grinned, which looked somewhat disturbing given the remaining bruising. Besides, I'm going to have a great story to tell at parties. Got my face rearranged by a Korathi at the academy. That's way cooler than fell down some stairs. Vrixnall didn't seem entirely convinced, but his skin patches brightened slightly. You are very gracious. I'm really not, I'm just too tired to hold a grudge about an accident. The administrative response to the incident was, predictably, excessive. The Academy Board convened an emergency meeting that lasted 6 hours and produced a preliminary report of 400 pages. The conclusions were simultaneously obvious and unhelpful. The dampening field had failed due to an undetectable stress fracture in a power coupling. Safety protocols had functioned adequately, but not perfectly, and they needed to revise their approach to training exercises involving humans. Commander Zixorth, the Academy's commandant and a Threxian with 40 years of military experience, visited Marcus on the 5th day. He was an imposing figure, nearly 3 meters tall, with iridescent scales and the kind of presence that made cadets straighten their posture unconsciously. "Cadet Chen," he began, his voice carrying the gravitas of high rank and considerable authority. "I want to personally apologize for this incident. The Academy failed in its duty to ensure your safety. We are implementing new protocols to prevent, sir, with respect. Please don't change the training because of this." Marcus interrupted, which was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, depending on your perspective. Commander Zixorth's facial scales rippled, indicating surprise. "Cadet, you sustained severe injuries. We have a responsibility to train us for real combat situations." Marcus finished. "Sir, accidents happen. I knew the risks when I applied. Every human in the program knew the risks. We're from a planet that's constantly trying to kill us. We're not going to break because of one training accident." "Your face was broken," Commander Zixorth pointed out. "And now it's fixed. Modern medicine is amazing. Sir, if you make the training safer for humans, you're going to make us less prepared for actual combat. And that's more dangerous in the long run." Commander Zixorth was silent for a long moment, studying the young human with an expression that might have been respect. "You make a compelling argument, Cadet. However, we will be implementing additional safety redundancies." "That's non-negotiable." "Yes, sir. Additional safety redundancies sound great." Marcus was discharged from the medical ward after 7 days, which was 5 days earlier than Dr. Thexali had initially projected and 3 days earlier than she felt comfortable with. However, all his medical indicators were green. The bone healing was ahead of schedule, and keeping him in the ward when he was clearly ready for activity seemed unnecessarily punitive. He returned to classes the following day, sporting some impressive residual bruising and the kind of facial swelling that made him look like he'd lost a fight with a door. His fellow cadets treated him with a mixture of concern and awe. The humans in his cohort greeted him with variations on nice face, dumbass, which appeared to be a form of affection in their culture. The combat training protocols were revised over the following weeks. The Academy added triple redundant safety systems, increased the monitoring frequency, and instituted new rapid response medical procedures specifically for human physiology. They also, somewhat quietly, recalibrated their expectations for human durability. 6 weeks after the incident, Marcus returned to full active duty. The orbital fracture had healed completely. His nose was straight, maybe straighter than it had been before. The soft tissue damage had resolved with minimal scarring. Dr. Thexali performed a final examination and declared him fit for unrestricted activity, while privately marveling at the sheer regenerative capability of human biology. 8 weeks after the incident, Marcus was back in Training Hall 7 for his scheduled combat exercises. The entire facility had been extensively inspected and upgraded. The dampening fields now had 6 independent power systems and enough redundancy to make an engineer weep with joy. Commander Zixorth was observing the training session because he was not going to have another incident on his watch. He watched as Marcus paired with a different cadet, a Threxian who matched him in size but not in gravity tolerance. The match proceeded smoothly. The dampening fields functioned flawlessly. Nobody's face was rearranged. Afterward, Commander Zixorth approached Marcus as he was leaving the training hall. "Cadet Chen." A moment. Marcus turned, standing at attention. "Sir, how does your face feel?" Marcus touched his nose experimentally. "Perfect, sir. Better than before, actually. I could breathe through my left nostril properly for the first time in years." Commander Zixorth made a sound that might have been a laugh. Cadet, you are aware that the medical staff have been monitoring your recovery closely. They've documented human healing capabilities extensively. They've shared their findings with the Galactic Medical Consortium. Yes, sir, Doctor. Thexali mentioned that. Do you know what the response has been? No, sir. Disbelief, followed by repeated requests for confirmation that the data wasn't corrupted, followed by 3 separate medical research teams requesting permission to study human healing factors. Commander Zixorth paused. You've inadvertently advanced galactic medical research by approximately a decade, simply by recovering from what should have been a career-ending injury. Marcus considered this. That's actually pretty cool, sir. Yes, Cadet, it is pretty cool. Commander Zixorth's scales rippled with amusement. Dismissed. As Marcus walked away, Commander Zixorth reflected on the peculiar nature of humans. They came from a planet that tried to kill them daily. They evolved to survive injuries that would be fatal to most species. They laughed at their own suffering. They refused to accept limitations that other species considered reasonable. And somehow, impossibly, they made it work. The Interstellar Combat Academy had been operating for 6,000 standard cycles, training the finest military officers in known space. They had adapted to accommodate 47 different species, each with their own unique requirements and limitations. The humans, Commander Zixorth suspected, were going to require significantly more adaptation than anyone had anticipated. 3 months after the incident, the Academy hosted a formal evaluation review. Representatives from all member species attended, along with observers from Earth's military command. The purpose was to assess the success of human integration into the Academy program and determine whether the trial cohort had proven the viability of continuing human enrollment. The presentation included detailed incident reports, academic performance metrics, physical training assessments, and medical data. The statistics were impressive. The humans consistently scored in the top 15% of their classes academically. Their physical performance was exceptional in high-gravity environments and competitive in standard conditions. Their tactical thinking showed creative approaches that other species hadn't considered, probably because their approaches involved accepting risk levels that made safety officers nervous. And then there was the medical data from Marcus's injury and recovery, which had already been circulated through academic medical journals and was causing quite the stir in xenobiology circles. The committee deliberated for 6 hours before reaching a unanimous decision. The human trial cohort was successful. The Academy would continue accepting human applicants. Additional safety protocols would remain in place but would not restrict human participation in standard training exercises. When Marcus heard the news, his response was characteristically understated. Cool. In the grand tradition of military academies throughout history and across species, the incident became a legend. First-year cadets heard the story of the human who got his face destroyed and came back to training 6 weeks later. The details became slightly embellished with each retelling. By the end of the academic year, some versions claimed Marcus had walked to the medical bay under his own power while holding his severed nose in his hand, which was not remotely accurate but made for a better story. Vrixnall and Marcus became close friends, bonded by the shared trauma of an experience that neither of them would forget. They continued training together, though Vrixnall was noticeably more careful during sparring matches for several weeks until Marcus convinced him to stop pulling his strikes. Dr. Thexali published 3 papers on human facial trauma recovery and became a recognized expert in human medical treatment. She never quite got over her amazement at how quickly humans healed, but she learned to expect it rather than being constantly surprised by it. The Academy's insurance premiums went up significantly, but Commander Zixorth considered it a worthwhile investment in galactic military cooperation. Also, the human military attaché had pointed out that Earth would be sending more cadets regardless of the Academy's concerns, so they might as well get ahead of the curve. 10 months after the incident, Marcus graduated in the top 5% of his class. He received commendations for tactical excellence, leadership capability, and resilience under pressure. The fact that he'd had his face surgically reconstructed mid-semester was noted in his permanent record with what might charitably be called bemused respect. At the graduation ceremony, he stood in formation with cadets from 47 different species, all of them representing the finest military traditions of their respective civilizations. He wore his dress uniform with pride, his face bearing no visible trace of the injury that had nearly ended his career before it began. Commander Zixorth, delivering the commencement address, made a point that resonated with the assembled graduates. You have trained alongside species different from yourselves. You have learned that strength takes many forms. Some of you come from worlds of peace and prosperity. Others come from worlds that forged you in hardship. All of you have proven worthy to serve. His gaze drifted briefly to the human section of graduates, a small smile crossing his features. Some of you have proven particularly difficult to keep in medical wards. The humans laughed. So did several other species who had gotten to know them over the past year. 5 years later, the Interstellar Combat Academy's human enrollment had increased to 50 cadets per cycle. The medical facilities had been further upgraded, with an entire wing dedicated to human physiology and staffed by specialists who understood the peculiar requirements of treating a species that healed too fast and complained too little. The training protocols had been refined to challenge humans appropriately without unnecessarily endangering other species. Commander Marcus Chen, now serving aboard the ISV Pathfinder as a tactical operations officer, occasionally received messages from Academy Command asking for his perspective on training modifications. He provided detailed, thoughtful responses that demonstrated the tactical acumen that had made him an exceptional student. He also, on one occasion, suggested that they consider adding Australian fauna to the Academy's xenobiology curriculum as a way to prepare cadets for truly hostile life forms. The suggestion was politely declined, though the xenobiology instructor did spend several hours reviewing Earth's database with what could only be described as horrified fascination. The incident report from Training Hall 7 remained in the Academy archives, a cautionary tale about equipment failure and a testament to human resilience. New cadets studied it in their safety orientation, learning about the importance of redundant systems and rapid medical response. What they really learned, though none of the instructors explicitly stated it, was a more fundamental truth about the species from the little blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Humans were tough, not in the way of heavily armored species or those adapted for extreme environments. Tough in the way of organisms that had evolved on a world that demanded constant adaptation or death. They broke, yes, but they healed. And they came back stronger, often with a joke about their own misfortune and a disturbing eagerness to continue training. The Galactic Collective had spent millennia developing technologies to protect their citizens from harm, to create safe environments where injury was rare and death rarer still. It was a remarkable achievement, a testament to civilization and progress. The humans had spent millennia learning to survive on a planet that actively tried to kill them, developing bodies that could endure punishment and minds that refused to quit. It was a different kind of achievement, brutal and pragmatic, and terrifyingly effective. When the Academy's first human cadets had arrived, the administration had worried about keeping them safe. 5 years later, they worried about keeping everyone else safe from humans who had been given military training and access to advanced weaponry. It was, Commander Zixorth reflected during a quiet moment in his office, exactly the kind of partnership the Galactic Collective needed. Species who had forgotten what true danger felt like, allied with species who had never known a day without it. A balance between civilization's protection and survival's edge. The datapad on his desk showed enrollment projections for the next cycle, more humans applying. More species requesting humans as training partners, recognizing that the Deathworlders could push them to excel in ways that safe, controlled training never could. Commander Zixorth approved the enrollment numbers and filed the report. Somewhere in Training Hall 7, safety engineers were triple-checking the dampening field systems, because nobody wanted a repeat of the incident that had almost ended a cadet's career and had instead become the foundation of a legend. The Interstellar Combat Academy had been operating for 6,000 standard cycles, training the finest military officers in known space. They had adapted to accommodate 47 different species, each with unique requirements. The 48 species, from a little death world called Earth, had proven that sometimes the best way to prepare for the dangers of the galaxy was to recruit people who came from somewhere even more dangerous. And if those people occasionally required emergency facial reconstruction surgery, well, that was simply the cost of excellence.